morning. Happy Monday. We are back to do a return flight that we started yesterday. So yesterday we flew Orly to Calvi, and this morning I woke up wanting to do the return flight. So here we are. It's currently 5:30 local time. Flight departs at 6, so we should be boarding right about now.
Boarding requested. Passengers bus is coming.
Oh, they're getting bussed in. Okay. Alright, what's the load time? That's 22 minutes. That works for me. It's taking care of the fuel too. Alright. This Fly Live banner was giving me all kinds of issues yesterday.
Passengers boarding starting.
Doors are closed. Okay. Alright. So while they're getting busted and boarded and bags getting loaded, I need to fix this Fly Live banner. Say now the thing. Okay, there it is. Let's say now the thing is not even showing up. Alright. So we got that in. Let's go over today's flight's details. So we're flying Air France 7573 with service to Paris Orly. Like I said before, I did the leg here yesterday. We're climbing up to flight level 340, traveling 489 nautical miles. We got 144 passengers on today. Let's see, 4,752 pounds of cargo. Makes our payload 30,096 pounds. Fuel, we're gonna get 13,661 pounds of fuel. So right now we're at 8,300 and it's going up. So 13,6 on the fuel. One thing I did want to check was if we had any controllers. That up real quick. I don't think there's any controllers. This thing confuses the hell out of me sometimes, right? So this is the land. There's Italy. Alright, so we're right here. Alright, looks like there's no controllers anywhere on the route. So I'll be flying solo dolo. Let's change altitude 37,000. 34,000, so flight level 340. There's no way the boarding is complete, but okay. That's something else I have to adjust in GSX, because that went way too fast. Close the doors. Good, it did. 340. And then last but not least, we need our cost index, which is 17. Everything look good on that page. We know we're gonna get 13.6 on the fuel. FKC, and then white one. Alright, so winds are 200 at 20 knots. Hey, it's clear. 22 degrees. 10:07. Alright, so we'll take off 18 again. That's what we planned for, right? Direct to Merlot. Right, which makes sense. Into Orly, depending on ILS 25, Ardo 9 whiskey. That makes sense too. Start the APU. Alright, jump back over to the tablet. Let's get some charts up. For here, we'll probably just need the airport chart. But for Orly, looks like we're going to need the Ardo 9 whiskey, the ILS 25. The ILS 25. Let's see if you can figure out what the transition is going to look like. There's nothing there, okay. Ardo 9 whiskey. Alright, got that there. And then the airport chart. I'm blind. Taxi chart, airport info, airport. That's the one. Alright, so Calvi, France, 7,600 foot runway. So runway 18. We're gonna taxi out on Bravo, left turn, 180 to 18. All right. Seems simple. All right, so back down here. Load cheaters, accept it. Thinking the overhead looks good for now. How much more? We got 20 minutes for departure. What the heck was that? I know it wouldn't trip when I just seen that. Wow. It's supposed to be 1600. Okay. Still taking on some more fuel? Here we are, okay. 76 and 144, alright. I'm thinking for GSX, I probably... That's probably what the problem is. Yeah. But you know what? It shouldn't even matter. Let's restart it. Because it's going to just pick up where it left off at. I didn't use it to load fuel or anything, so. Alright, that should be enough time for it to load, right? We're too late for it. I'm not too late for nothing. Alright. Didn't even show me the settings. Oh god, this thing. Alright, there we go. With the timings. Alright. I put to estimate passenger numbers, so I don't understand why you're too late for your scheduled departure. Hold on. Maybe because in sim brief the departure time is different. Alright, that's updated. Let's see now if it's gonna let me rock. I mean, those numbers are still off. Alright, sim brief is okay now. Ooh. Alright. So yeah, we don't have to do anything since the imaginary passengers are boarding. I'm going to disconnect external power though. I definitely don't need those. How much more time do we have? $16 minutes. Make sure my A-cars is running properly. Of course that won't pull up. Alright, there we go. Yeah, I ain't fooling with it. Let me close it. Oh man, it says not responding. Yep, just close the program. Don't even try to do whatever you were doing. Let's just restart it. Alright. think whatever happened last night is kind of carrying over into today, and I ain't got time for it. All right. Flight details, 6 o'clock departure. Fly. And I have all that up. I got 22 more passengers to go. Now I'll try to make my radio calls today. Say via Holland. Well, yeah, today's flight time is I don't think I said an hour and 35 minutes. Let's get that out there. Hour and 35 minutes. We got 11 more passengers to go. Alright, so APU is on. Go ahead, TCAS to auto. Page. Ten minutes early. We'll probably be done boarding in about 2 minutes or so. That would make us be 10 minutes before departure time. That might be a tad bit early, so I'll fast forward the time, maybe about 5 minutes or so. 5 to 7 minutes. Alright, so our weight, zero fuel weight is 127,216. We don't even need that. We just need 127.2, 28.6. 127.2 slash 28.6. Alright, let's cross that. Looks good. Alright. And then with that, we come over to here. And get our takeoff speeds. Flaps 2, packs on. Calculate. So 136 is going to be our rotation speed. Also gonna send that to CDU, and 2 up on the trim, 0.2. Alright, make sure that entered in correctly. Okay, did. Then over to the flight plan page, and let's remove all discounts, all of them. Okay, so there's our flight plan company page. So I think our final load sheets come through. Accept that. And keep it trucking. Let's ask for pushback and departure. And let me fast forward just a smidge since 5:50. 556 is good. So before start, windows and doors are closed. APU is on.
Hello, Captain. Oui, il y a un réticent pushback.
Fuel pumps on. Beacon is on. External power disconnected. Seatbelt signs are on. Thrust levels are idle. Barrel reference. The 1007's checked. Transponder mode is auto. Takeoff data set and view.
Bypass pas incertain.
Alright, let's wait for start. Let me connect A cars too as well. Alright. I'm gonna want maybe a straight back.
Looking here.
Or maybe a tail to the, I think in the straight back. And then we can crank the turn ourselves. Or maybe a tilt to the right, but I have to monitor it since there's not a lot of room to maneuver back there. So yeah, that's what we'll try. Wish me luck. Tilt to the right.
Release parking brakes, please.
Alright.
Starting push. All engines clear. Start at wheel.
It started to turn. Now I'm clear of that stair truck. Engine mode selector, ignition start. Master switch 2 on. So far it's doing a really good job. I know what I did. I didn't put the AP bleed on, did I? I put the probe heat on. Alright, let's do that a second time.
Set parking brakes.
Alright, brake set. It actually pushed me in a decent fashion.
Unlocking gear.
Okay, engine mode selector. Alright, we're looking good now.
Tow truck disconnected. Bypass par mode.
Alright, it's a good start on 2. Starting
Left
number
is
1.
clear. Right is clear.
Right. Alright, there's the pin. Thank you. Good start on 1. Remote selector normal. APU bleed off. APU master off. Auto brake max. Flight controls. Full left neutral. Full right left, rudder neutral, full right, neutral. Just shimmy back and forth between the two. Alright, cool. We got trim up to 1, 2. Right. Predictive wind shear on, arm spoilers, flaps 2. Rudder trim is centered out. Okay. Looking real good there. Anti-ice is not being used. Flight instruments. Alright, altitude setting there checked. Takeoff config. Alright. Let's make sure we're on Unicom. Forgot about that. Yep, we are. Calvi traffic, Air France 7573. Just pushed it back from Papa 5, taxiing to runway 18. Calvi traffic. Alright, brakes release. And let's get going. Very short taxi, let's call it them. Taxi light on. Double check everything just to make sure. Come down here and just turn my TCAS on now because runway's right here to the left. Okay, so I found out what that was. Somebody said I got a call right here and you can see it flashing attention. What does that mean? How do I address this? They're calling me, but like this? How does this work? Alright, went off now. Alright, so I guess I need to ask when that's flashing, what do I press? Okay, so we're rolling. Alright, so lights on. Alright, left is clear, right is clear. Straight or not, 'cause I'm not. Let me finish sending this message real quick. Alright. I guess you should let them know. Calvi traffic, Air France 7573, backtracking, runway 18. Take off to the north. Calvi traffic. downhill slope here. I can feel myself speeding. We're doing 40? What? Slow it down. This thing keeps skipping. Not like these settings at all. Alright, let's rock and roll. Take off, man, flex, SRS, runway, auto thrust move. Black art, no they're not. E1, rotate. Bottom of the brake, gear up. Alright, so we're gonna... Speed's fine. Hit the autopilot right here because that's spinning crazy. That should help stabilize a little bit. Alright, so let me turn these lights off. Put this on speed brakes. Here's our turn. Climb thrust. Definitely gonna have to go back to my old settings because this thing is so choppy now. Flaps 1. Oh, you know what? Where all these mountains is probably what the issue is. I mean, it is my normal plane. What I fly the most, at least. Calvi traffic, airframe 7573. Departed the pattern to the north. Calvi traffic. Alright, flaps up. This is a lot of turbulence because of the mountain range. When I came in, I landed runway 18. I didn't really notice that there were that many mountains out on the opposite side. So taking off now, I'm like getting beat up. There's transition altitude at 5,000. Yeah. That kind of turbulence mixed with the skipping that the sim was doing is not a good mix. So coming up on 8,000 feet. For 34,000. Turn off the exterior lights. After takeoff, check this landing gear retracted, engine mode select there is normal, spoilers are disarmed and retracted, flaps are retracted, packs are on, anti-ice is off, exterior lights are checked. Alright, seems like some pretty smooth here up here. Let me turn off these. Feel free to roam the cabin. Accelerating to 295. Alright. Overhead looks good. Center pedestal looks even better. Alright, so we're in a kind of chill climb sitting here. See. Corsica. I know there's the Air Corsica. That's in France too. The island, okay. I've never been. Looking from these photos, it's actually very beautiful. Wow. Damn. That's crazy. That's wild. Oh, that's where Ajaccio is at too, okay. Cruiser on the Mediterranean. Nice. Shoot, Calvi looks nice. Ajaccio looks nice. Bastia looks nice. Holy. He said, I am not rich, it was cheap. Hey man, I understand. You gotta get it in where you can. Guess I got someplace to add to my to-do list. This is crazy. See, I always hear about like Marseille and Nice. Yeah, I never heard of this island, Corsica. It's definitely nice. Nice is more like a what's it called again? Popular spot, right? Corsica's Italian. Ah, okay. Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, it's right there next to it. But it's crazy. Oh, is it split into two sides? Because when I look up Corsica, it comes up as island in France. That's what it says, but there is a line that kind of goes through it that separates the northern part from the southern part. So I wonder if it's split into two, kind of like St. Martin is split into two different sides. That's what I'm thinking. very beautiful though, I'll tell you that. I would have never guessed. Damn. Even on Google, when the first set of pictures that hit you is like, what? The water is that blue? What? Oh, this thing is just tripping all together. Is my Fly Live working properly, or it looks to be working properly? I don't know what's going on with this thing. And it stopped working without 2 minutes into it. Oh well. I think after this I'll probably play some multiverses. If not, then some Dragon Ball Fighters. But I'm in the mood to play a fighting game for sure. Exactly. Exactly the same exact thing. Mice and Bonaparte. I don't know, this is a French is the official and most widely spoken language on the island. Corsican, the native tongue, and Italo-Dalmatian language is recognized as one of France's regional languages. Interesting. What I'm looking at here is saying the entire island is French, but why is it split like the way the line that I see going through it? It definitely has a split. Maybe it's two different territories. I don't know. Nice though, for sure. Definitely got to make it over there one day. Alright, so we're at 289 for 340. Climbing smoothly. Get the weather at Orly. Okay. Ooh, gusting winds. Okay, 290, 16, gusting 31. 2,000 meters. Alright, it's raining. Alright, weather in Orly's kind of... it's doable, but it's going to be kind of fun here. Then it's, oh gosh, 317 gusting 30, then becoming 310 at 15, gusting 25. Oh yeah, it's gonna be a wild ride into Orly today. Mentally prepare myself. But you know what? Last night is when last night the time. Yeah, but I mean last night my time, so maybe about 14 hours ago, I took off, and it was kind of bumpy out of there. I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't crazy, but it was kind of bumpy. It's saying we got 51 minutes. 51 minutes. On top of the sentence in like 30 minutes. Alright. Let's see what I can find to watch. I wish there was a way to do like picturing. Oh, there is actually. This is what I'll do. Alright. Alright. Just about at cruising altitude. Let's turn on a show. I can open up a window. Window capture, there we go. This. I don't want it to be that big. I can make it. You know what, maybe we can make it big. Let's do this. I'm gonna delete this. and then just switch over to the browser.
Welcome to the NBA.
Okay. Hold on. And how do I do this again? There. So we got ads. Let me turn the sound on.
Humans make mistakes, that's just a fact of life, but in the cockpit those mistakes can quickly have dire consequences, and because of that we have created loads of strategies to try and catch them. But what happens when almost everything conspires to undercut those strategies and create a situation where the pilots just cannot figure out what is happening? And they only have a few seconds left to do it.
Damn.
Stay tuned.
Off the edge she went.
The summer of 2007 was a really stressful time for everyone in the Brazilian aviation industry. Demand for flights had at that point been growing with around 15% per year for several years in a row, and to make things worse, Brazil's largest airline, Varig, had recently ceased operation. When that happened, other airlines had tried to expand to fill the gap, but the country's airport infrastructure just wasn't keeping up with the growth. Outdated airports and understaffed control towers caused delays throughout the networks, and by July 2007, over half of all flights in Brazil operated with large delays, which really infuriated the passengers. Pilots at TAM Airlines, the now largest airline in Brazil, felt the stress of this situation quite keenly. Over the previous 4 years, TAM had doubled in size, hiring thousands of new pilots and pushing them through training as quickly as was humanly possible. And once they were done, these pilots now not only had to face constant delays and congestions, but also angry customers who disrupted flights and assaulted airline employees.
Damn.
Now, TAM Airlines had tried to improve their customer relations by forcing one of the pilots to stay outside the cockpit and greet the passengers during boarding, but that was a policy that the pilots really disliked. Because not only did this new procedure expose them to a lot of anger and abuse, it also made the pre-flight checks and paperwork take much longer, which just worsened the delays. So overall, this situation was causing a huge amount of stress for the crews, but TAM Airlines didn't really offer any solutions or support to help them deal with it.
Is TAM even
In fact,
flying
the
anymore?
airline only had one aviation psychologist for the entire staff of over 5,000 pilots. But for the pilots involved in today's story, this background stress was only the beginning. In the evening of July the 17th, 2007, 2 TAM pilots arrived to the southern Brazilian city of Porto Alegre after a short domestic flight from Sao Paulo. Once they had landed and taxied into their stand, they immediately started preparing for a quick turnaround for the next flight back to Sao Paulo again. The plane that they were flying that night was a 9-year-old Airbus A320, which was not exactly in mint condition, but we'll get back to that in a moment. The pilot in command was a very experienced 53-year-old captain who had over 13,600 flying hours in total, including more than 2,200 on the Airbus A320.
I don't think I'll ever have that many hours.
He was known by his colleagues as a diligent pilot.
That is
who
wild.
always read fine print
13,000.
manuals and who tried to really understand every procedure and system that he was working with. But he could also be a bit slow, especially under pressure. His colleague and second in command was actually also a captain who was 54 years old and had even more flight hours, over 14,700 in total, plus some amount of unlogged hours as a flight engineer. But he had only about 237 hours on the Airbus A320, and even though that was the case, he had been hired directly as a captain onto that type only a few months earlier. Now you might be asking why there was a second captain on this flight instead of just a normal first officer, and the fact is that this occasionally does happen, that 2 captains will fly together, but it's normally pretty rare since schedules try to avoid it if possible. But in this case, because of that rapid expansion that I mentioned earlier, TAM Airlines' hiring, scheduling and training department weren't at the time actually communicating clearly with each other, and as a result of that, the airline had significantly more captains than first officers. which in turn meant that TAM often had to schedule flights with 2 captains together. I have flown with other captains many times myself, and I actually do enjoy that, but it comes with some real potential CRM challenges. You see, all captains are used to their own command style, and it can often be a bit awkward to tell another captain what to do. Because of that, it's really important that a clear briefing about who does what and who is in charge is done before the flight, since that normally helps quite a bit. But there is also another issue with the setup, and that is that a captain is often not that used to operate from the right seat anymore. There might have been years since we have sat in that seat, and therefore everything will look a little bit different from that perspective, especially if you have limited time on the type, as this acting first officer now also did. There is obviously training for this, something that we refer to as a right seat check, which we have to do every year, but that involves very minimal handling and almost nothing as pilot monitoring. Now, we don't know how much briefing these pilots actually did before departure, but we do know that they had not been especially trained for communication strategies between 2 captains in the cockpit, apart from that right seat check that I just mentioned. And that wasn't the only part of their training that was a little bit subpar. In fact, TAM Airlines had rushed a lot of their pilots very quickly through the training while converting its fleet from the 4100 over to the Airbus A320. They did offer more theoretical training than Airbus recommended, but the amount of training in cockpit procedures was only 12 hours versus Airbus's 40, and simulator training was also 7 hours less than what Airbus recommended.
Don't you love that?
Now, all of these factors had, of course, increased the level of background risk at TAM, but on this particular day, even more stress factors just kept piling on. For example, when the pilots had first picked up this aircraft earlier on that same day, they had found out that it was operating with 1 thrust reverser inoperative. Now, the purpose of the thrust reverser is, of course, to reverse the engine thrust in order to help slow the aircraft down after landing or after a rejected takeoff. And on the IAE V2500 engines, which this aircraft was using, the thrust reversers consisted of blocking doors, who transisted aft along the outside of the engine, opening cascades to allow the bypass air to escape forward instead of backwards. Now, although the thrust reversers produce a loud, impressive roar during every landing, they normally only contribute a small portion of the aircraft's total braking power and are actually not required for dispatch during most conditions. This aircraft had suffered a fault with its right-hand thrust reverser several days earlier, but the TAM maintenance technicians had not been able to fix it yet, so instead they had just deactivated it and written it up in the hold item list in the technical log. When the pilots had seen this earlier on during the day, they had checked the corresponding procedures in the minimum equipment list, or MEL, who lists all of the systems that are allowed to be inoperative together with any procedures that might have to be performed. According to the MEL, the procedure for landing with only 1 thrust reverser was actually supposed to be the same as landing with 2. During a normal landing, an A320 pilot first pulls the thrust levers to idle right before touchdown, and then when the plane touches the ground, the pilot then pulls the levers a little bit further back into the reverse position, together with the reversal handles. Now, if both reversers are working, that's great, but if one isn't working, well, then that's also okay, it just won't activate. So because of this, this actually was not seen as a huge deal for the crew, at least not the first flight. In fact, on that flight over to Porto Alegre, they had followed this procedure and everything had gone perfectly. The captain only needed to use a little bit of rudder to compensate for the slight asymmetric thrust that this 1 thrust reverser was now causing. But their next flight, TAM Airlines Flight 3054, was going to take them back to Congonhas Airport in Sao Paulo, which was a completely different ballgame. And that's because Congonhas Airport was notorious in Brazil for being not only tricky, but at times downright dangerous. And I'll tell you all about that after this. In order to give you the very best, most detailed explanations of stories like this, my research often takes me to loads of articles and news sources from the US or South America. But since I live in Europe, this also means that I frequently run into geo-restrictions. And that's where today's 5 meters long, which is not a lot for modern large. And actually still is. You just take it completely risk-free for up to 30 days with a guaranteed full refund if you're not completely satisfied. Thank you, Nord. Now back to the story. As a primary domestic airport for Sao Paulo, the largest city in South America, Congonhas Airport was, and actually still is, the busiest airport in all of Brazil and the linchpin of the country's entire aviation network. But Congonhas is located in the middle of the city, surrounded by tall buildings with no room to expand, even though the main runway is only 1,945 meters long, which is not a lot for modern larger airliners. On top of that, the central position of Congonhas within the Brazilian route network was actually a major cause of the systemic delays back in 2007, since its limited landing slots and parking spaces created a bottleneck that had ripple effects far beyond Sao Paulo. For pilots though, landing at Congonhas was not just inconvenient, it could be genuinely scary. The main runway, 35 left and 17 right, had no runway end safety areas, or resas for short, since it was surrounded on all sides by steep embankments overlooking busy city streets. Now this of course meant that overrunning the already short runway by more than just a few meters could have potentially disastrous consequences. Now, up until the time of this story, there had never been a really serious overrun accident there, but a lot of pilots believed that it was just a matter of time. And not just because the runway was short and had no safety margins. No, one of the biggest problems was that the runway was also not very well surfaced, and it tended to become very slippery when wet, which was quite often. Airport authorities had taken several measures to try and mitigate the risks associated with this, including deploying special equipment to remove rubber from the runway, trying different surface additives, etc. But nothing had worked very well, since the water just tended to stay in puddles on the uneven surface. This caused the airport to eventually adopt a policy where whenever rain was observed, airport operations would be temporarily stopped, while a representative for the airport authority went out onto the runway to measure the friction coefficient and determine whether it was within limits. In May 2007, runway 35 left and 17 right had been closed for a proper resurfacing to try and solve this friction problem once and for all. The best way of preventing standing water is by, apart from making sure that there's no uneven areas for water to collect, to also carve grooves into the runway. With that, and with a surface that slopes slightly downward towards the edges, this will allow the water to run off the pavement while leaving the ridges in between exposed for optimal contact with the aircraft tires. However, as the runway restoration project neared its deadline, these grooves still hadn't been made. But the airport authorities still made the decision to reopen the runway on the 29th of June 2007 with a plan to install those grooves at a later, unspecified date. The decision to reopen the runway without grooves was not made with the input of Brazil's Civil Aviation Authority, ANAC, and that was because the entire renovation project had lacked ANAC approval, which was in turn because the airport itself, the busiest airport in Brazil, did not even have an ANAC operating certificate.
Makes sense.
The fact that ANAC was slow to act and struggled to accomplish even their basic safety oversight tasks only further convinced pilots that Congonhas Airport was unsafe and that nobody was doing anything about it. Now, speaking of being ineffective, as it turns out later, ANAC actually had drafted a rule all the way back in 2006 that would have required passenger jets landing at Congonhas to have both thrust reversers operational, but after that rule was drafted, no one ever got around to actually implement it, which would soon have terrifying consequences. After reviewing the paperwork, greeting the passengers and completing all of the turnaround checks, the pilots of TAM Airlines Flight 3054 made their final calculations before departing for Sao Paulo. With every seat in the airplane filled, the weight of the aircraft was calculated at 66.9 tons, including 2.4 tons of extra fuel, because the airline had a policy of tankering fuel from Porto Alegre since it was much cheaper there. That meant that the weight of the aircraft on landing at Congonhas would be around 63.5 tons, which was only 1 ton below the maximum landing weight for that airport under the reported weather conditions. And to make things even worse, those conditions were not great. The active META for Congonhas indicated light rain over the aerodrome, variable ceilings from 800 to 1600 feet, visibility 6,000 to 8,000 meters, and winds between 8 to 12 knots out of the north, fortunately straight down the operating runway.
More ads.
This weather was depressing, but still well above minimum, so there was no reason to start thinking about diversions, at least as long as the airport stayed open. But it would likely be quite slippery with that weather. With that information in the back of their minds, the crew pushed back from the gate, and at time 17:19 they received their takeoff clearance, departing Porto Alegre with an estimated arrival time in Sao Paulo of just before 1900 local time. The takeoff proceeded absolutely normally with no issues, but just after getting airborne, the Porto Alegre departure controller advised the crew that Congonhas airport had now been temporarily closed due to the wet and slippery runway conditions. By the time the pilots got that message, the airport had actually already reopened again, having been closed only for a few minutes whilst the runway friction was checked. But although the pilots soon were told that the airport was back open again, this would have likely reinforced their belief that they were flying into a potentially very tricky situation. In fact, just the day before, an incident had occurred at Congonhas when an ATR-42 from another airline had hydroplaned on landing, causing it to slide off the runway, striking a light pole and a concrete box, which caused the nose gear to collapse. Now, nobody had been seriously hurt in that accident, but the aircraft was so badly damaged that it was ultimately written off. And that had happened with only light rain reported on this new ungrooved runway surface.
That's crazy. They had all the signs.
The pilots of Flight 3054 had likely heard about this and therefore had been keenly aware of the potential risk that this now still wet runway would pose to them. In any case, Flight 3054 continued to climb towards their cruise altitude of 21,000 feet, and whilst they were doing that, they were continuously encountering quite rough weather with moderate to occasionally severe turbulence. Twice, the pilots had to request modifications to the route to avoid this turbulence, as well as building thunderstorms, which would have likely also increased their workload. At time 18:03, they were finally informed that Congonhas had reopened, and that likely didn't come as a big surprise to them. You see, frequent starting and stopping operations at Congonhas was essentially normal, so hearing that it was closed was not a strong reason to divert, especially since a lot of pilots at the time felt an implicit pressure from the company management to avoid diversion, since that could just further hurt their reputation. As the flight neared its destination, the pilots would have carried out their descent and approach briefing, going over all of the items that they would need to know. This would have likely included landing distance calculations, procedures, and any threats they were facing, but since the cockpit voice recorder on this aircraft only recorded the last 30 minutes of the flight, the recording didn't start until after this point where briefings would have normally happened, so we don't really know the full extent of those briefings. Now, during the descent, when the recordings finally started, we did get some hints about what the pilots were thinking of. The captain, for example, asked the acting first officer to verify the conditions at Congonhas, while emphasizing that this was especially important given that they would land with only one thrust reverser. The captain also complained that he had a slight headache, the reason for which was never determined, but I think that anyone could experience a little bit of stress headache under these kind of circumstances. Anyway, everything else was completely normal, and Flight 3054 soon started getting vectors for the ILS approach to runway 35 left, with the captain as pilot flying and the acting first officer as pilot monitoring. Now, it makes perfect sense that the captain would be flying this approach himself. He was both more experienced on the aircraft and was also sitting in the left seat, which was his normal seating position, while his more junior colleague was sitting in a seat that he was less used to. The conditions on the ground were now quite tricky and would require the full skill and attention of the captain, but it is worth remembering here that this also meant that the less experienced pilot would have the monitoring role, tasked with finding and pointing out any mistakes as early as possible due to his now significantly lower workload. Remember that. In any case, Flight 3054 soon successfully intercepted the localizer and glide slope and started descending down towards the runway. Quite quickly, they were completely stabilized, on speed, on glide slope, with the cockpit configuration, and with all of the checklists complete. Everything completely according to the plan at that stage. But the captain was clearly nervous, and you could see that by him asking the acting first officer to again ask the tower about the runway conditions. And this time, the answer was that the runway was now wet and slippery. When the captain heard this, he read it back to his colleague in an upset tone, showing that he definitely didn't like it, as he obviously recognized that these conditions were now very similar to those that had caused that accident on the previous day. And at some point during the approach, probably after hearing about those runway conditions, he likely made a fateful decision, one that came from a place of good intentions but would ultimately have tragic consequences. You see, the captain was an experienced pilot with over 2,000 hours on the Airbus A320, and he had likely flown with inoperative thrust reversers many times before. And when he had, he would have done so using a very different landing procedure. Remember how I said that the technique for landing with one thrust reverser was now the same as landing with two? Well, it turns out that that hadn't always been the case. Prior to January of 2007, the official Airbus procedure for landing with one thrust reverser was to, below 10 feet, pull both thrust levers back to the idle D10, and then pull only the thrust reverser from the side with operational reversers into reverse detents. However, between 1998 and 2004, there had been 3 separate A320 accidents where this procedure had been a factor, including one fatal accident in the Philippines. In each of those accidents, the requirement to move only one thrust lever contributed to the flight crew inadvertently leaving the other thrust lever in a forward thrust position during the landing instead of reducing it back to idle.
Uh-oh.
After those accidents, Airbus recognized that this special procedure was therefore vulnerable to human error, since moving both thrust levers together at first and then suddenly splitting mid-procedure to move only one lever was both unusual and unergonomic. So in order to solve this problem, in January 2007, only a month prior to this flight, Airbus had updated the procedure to remove the requirement to split the thrust levers, making the procedure essentially the same as a normal landing with 2 reversers.
Which makes
This change
sense to
was
me,
incorporated
because
into
if you
Time Airlines
have
NL, which the captain would have looked at before
one
flight
inoperative,
3054.
you might
But
as
there
well
was a
just
small
pull it back.
catch.
Why would you...
You see, normally the thrust reversers are considered
Change
an
what
extra,
you're doing.
a freebie, if you will. And in fact, some airlines doesn't even include them in the landing distance calculations normally, so that the actual distance to land always comes out at less than the calculated distance. This provides a nice, cushy safety margin. But if the runway is wet and slippery, well then we actually have to include the effect of the thrust reversers, because when the runway is slippery, the wheel brakes are less effective, meaning that the reverse thrust accounts for a greater percentage of the overall braking capability. If one thrust reverser is inoperative while landing on a contaminated runway, we obviously have to increase the calculated landing distance relative to what we would have if we had 2 thrust reversers. But with this new Airbus procedure, it also added another 55 meters to the landing distance on top of that already existing penalty.
I would take you guys swimming, but we don't have swimsuits.
Save on top brand
If
swimwear
they
at
added the
Sierra.
extra
I also
55 meters, how did they
And
crash?
why was that then? Well, it turns out that that was due to the way that the electronic engine control system on the Airbus A320 was designed. You see, when a thrust lever is moved into the reverse detent, it's actually commanding an increase in engine thrust to increase the reverse thrust. But if the reverser doors doesn't deploy to deflect the airflow, well then that thrust would increase in the forward direction instead, even though the thrust lever is in the reverse detent. Obviously, when the discrepancy between the thrust lever position and the actual thrust output reaches a certain value, the Airbus A320 Full Authority Digital Engine Control System, or FADEC, would intervene to lock the thrust on that affected engine to idle. But even though this intervention happened very quickly, it would for a brief period of time generate a little bit more forward thrust on that engine, causing the required landing distance to actually increase with 55 meters relative to the old procedure. So back in the cockpit of Flight 3054, the captain knew about the new procedure, but he also knew the old procedure since it had been enforced during the majority of his A320 career. This meant that he also likely understood that if he used the new procedure, he would have to add 55 meters to the landing distance, something that he really didn't want to do. So it is very likely, even though we can never know for sure, of course, that the captain now decided to use the old procedure instead to save those 55 meters. Now there are a few things that we need to keep in mind about this decision. One thing is that it has to be emphasized that in reality, they were never at any danger of actually overrunning the runway. In fact, with one reverser inoperative on a wet runway, the calculated landing distance was only 1,332 meters, which was well within the 1,935 meters available. So 55 meters doesn't seem like it would have anything very much, but we also have to remember that the captain was very, very concerned about this landing. He would have known that if he overran runway 35 left by 55 meters, the aircraft would fall down an embankment and onto a busy street. So you can almost imagine him thinking, if that happened, I would have really regretted not saving those 55 meters. But on the other hand, we also know that this procedure was changed due to real accidents, not hypothetical ones, in which several people lost their lives. And when you take that into consideration, then suddenly using the old procedure doesn't really seem worth it. But unfortunately, it's very possible that the captain didn't know about those previous accidents, since TAM Airlines was not distributing information about accidents in other airlines to its A320 pilots during the current training. It's also worth noting that this kind of non-adherence to standard operating procedures was so common at TAM that the flight data recorder had recorded not less than 5 different techniques used by different crews for landing with this issue on previous flights, clearly showing issues with standardization. Now, having made this decision to use the old procedure of moving only one thrust lever into reverse, the prudent thing to do for the pilots would have been to brief the risks associated with it, or, well, the second most prudent thing to do after just using the correct procedure. But as I said, the captain probably didn't know the risks, and in any case, no discussion of this could be heard on the cockpit voice recorder at any point during the approach. Now, the captain did at one point remind the acting first officers that they were landing with only one thrust reverser, but he didn't further clarify exactly what that would mean in terms of actions for each pilot or what to look for. Now, if you combine this relative lack of situational awareness with the elevated stress that the pilots were likely experiencing, well, then you have a situation that is ripe for human error. At time 1854, TAM Airlines Flight 3054 passed the threshold of runway 35 left, fully configured and ready to land. With the flaps and landing gear fully extended, there would have been quite a lot of drag on the airplane, so the engines were producing a fair bit of power to maintain the proper approach speed, with an EPR sitting at 1.18. On the Airbus A320, when the auto thrust is engaged, which basically is all the time, the thrust lever position doesn't show the pilots what the engines are actually doing, like it does on the Boeing 737 that I fly. Instead, on the A320, the pilot selects a general thrust regime using thrust lever detents, and then the flight computers determines the exact amount of thrust required to achieve what the pilot wants the aircraft to do. So that means that when an A320 flight crew positions the thrust lever in a particular regime, like reverse, idle, cruise, climb or toga, that gives the auto throttle permissions to use any amount of thrust up to a programmed limit associated with that operating regime. And for this approach, the pilots had set both thrust levers to the climb detent in order to give the auto thrusts the authority it needed to maintain the approach speed with all of the flaps and gear fully extended. However, when the auto thrust is disconnected, well, then the FADEC will start commanding a thrust output corresponding directly to the position of the thrust lever. Remember that. In the cockpit, the pilots now heard the standard radio altitude callouts.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Followed by the main landing gear setting perfectly onto the runway within the touchdown zone and at a speed of 142 knots. And just before the aircraft touched down, an automated voice also called out,
Retard, retard.
reminding the flight crew to reduce engine power back to idle. In response, the captain now grasped the thrust levers, likely very concentrated on the procedure that he was planning to use, since he knew that he couldn't afford to get this wrong. He therefore then moved the left thrust lever back to idle and then into reverse, causing the working left-hand reversers to immediately deploy. But unfortunately, by concentrating so much on moving only one thrust lever, he now inadvertently fell victim to the same mistake that had caused this procedure to be changed in the first place. He forgot to move the right-hand thrust lever back to idle and left it in the climb detent instead. The consequences of this error were immediate and severe. You see, on the Airbus A320, deployment of the ground spoilers is automatic, but can only occur when both thrust levers are positioned to idle or below.
So he had
The
no
ground spoilers are
spoilers.
crucial for stopping the airplane, since they will spoil the lift from the wings, allowing the aircraft to settle down onto its landing gear and brakes. This is why the spoilers can only deploy when the thrust levers are in idle and the weight is on the wheel, since you really don't want them to deploy accidentally while in flight or during a takeoff or go-around. But if the spoilers aren't deployed on landing, well, then the aircraft will continue to almost partially fly as it rolls down the runway, and since the weight of the airplane then isn't on the wheels, this greatly reduces the effectiveness of the wheel brakes, which are the primary means of stopping the aircraft. On the A320, it has been calculated that without the ground spoilers, braking effectiveness is reduced by up to 50%. But that's not all. Normally when landing, we also arm the outer brakes to almost immediately after touchdown apply wheel braking, but a much quicker and smoother way than we normally would if we did it manually. But the outer brakes also won't work unless the ground spoilers are first activated. So this was very, very bad, but there was still more to come. You see, when the captain moved the left thrust lever into reverse, that caused the outer thrust to disconnect, which meant that the power output of the right engine now became derived directly from the position of the thrust lever, which, if you remember, was set in the climb detent. As a result of this, the right engine now stopped at 1.18 EPR, which was the same setting that it roughly had during the approach. But that extra thrust to the right side, coupled with the reverse thrust on the left, was now enough to start causing some real problems. Also, despite this obviously inappropriate thrust situation, the retard callouts in the cockpit still stopped as soon as the left thrust lever was positioned at idle, which, if you ask me, defeats the purpose of that warning almost entirely. As it turns out, this scenario had not been envisioned by the developers of this warning, until those previous accidents that I mentioned earlier revealed the flaw in its operating logic. Airbus then developed an update for the flight warning computer that would have triggered both a master caution alarm and an ECAM warning message if a thrust lever was positioned above idle during landing.
I guarantee the plane didn't have the update yet.
Growing a startup is tough.
But unfortunately, this update was never made mandatory, and as a result, TAM Airlines had tragically neglected to install it. So instead of a clear warning, the pilots now received a sudden barrage of other subtle indications that something was very, very wrong, but nothing directly pointing to the culprit. After touchdown, the acting first officer soon recognized that the spoilers had not deployed, but instead of calling this out immediately, he instead waited and called out the positive operation of the number 1 thrust reverser instead, then followed by a mechanic sounding spoilers nada, meaning no spoilers. This did not highlight the high importance of the missing spoilers, but even if it had, there weren't any memory items for no spoilers for the captain to action. As this was happening, the captain had obviously realized that the plane wasn't decelerating normally, but he initially likely thought that this was due to the expected aquaplaning on the runway. This meant that for the first agonizing 6 seconds, no real manual braking was applied. After that, he started applying first asymmetric braking and full right rudder to try and control the direction of the aircraft, which was now starting to swerve more and more over to the left. He then applied max manual braking, but it didn't help much. Without the spoilers, the wings were still generating lift, so the tires just skimmed across the runway surface, and as soon as he applied the brakes, the wheels would have locked up due to the insufficient friction, which in turn would have caused the anti-skid system to relieve braking pressure until the skid stopped. So as a result, even max manual braking would have seemed to have almost no effect. Within just a few seconds, this situation likely caused a sense of mounting dread and panic in the cockpit as the plane rapidly chewed through the available landing distance, veering more and more towards the left due to the asymmetric thrust. It was later determined that if the pilots had recognized the incorrect thrust level position within the 7 seconds after the first officer's no spoiler call out, well, then the aircraft would have been able to stop on the runway. Now, when you are speeding down the runway, 7 seconds actually seems like an eternity, so why didn't the pilots figure out what was happening? Well, we will never know this for sure, but there are several possibilities. One factor is that it was dark in the cockpit, and the thrust levels on the Airbus are kind of small and hard to see. But more important, in my opinion, is the fact that on the Airbus, the thrust levels are often both out of sight and out of mind, since they aren't constantly moving in response to the out-of-thrust commands. Looking at thrust levels usually isn't a useful way to determine how much thrust is actually being produced. This could have made the thrust levels a less obvious thing to look at when the pilots realized that the plane wasn't slowing down. It's also worth noting that the captain would have been very focused on applying as much brake force as possible, because that's an instinctive human panic reaction in such a situation, as well as trying to get the directional control back. Now, this would have greatly reduced his ability to troubleshoot, so it would have fallen to the acting first officer to try and find out what the problem was. But he only had 220 hours on the Airbus and had been rushed through his training, so his odds of putting these quite technical puzzles together in time would have been pretty low. All of this meant that Flight 3054 was now traveling down the runway at well over 100 knots, while also drifting more and more over to the left. The captain did everything he could to try and counteract this drift using rudder and brakes, but rudder authority decreases as the speed goes down, so the asymmetric thrust soon completely overcame his ability to control the aircraft. The airplane soon crossed over the runway edge lights and onto the grass as the pilots tried desperately to get it to stop, but it was now far too late. Traveling at the speed of 96 knots, the aircraft now
96
first
knots at
crossed
the
over the
end is
taxiway
wild.
and then careened off the left side of the runway end zone, becoming briefly airborne for a few seconds as it flew over the 16-meter high embankment. It then just barely cleared the major boulevard below before it finally crashed directly into a fuel station and a building housing the offices of the TAM Airlines Express cargo service.
Damn. They got a lot of ads. There's probably like 4 or 5 ads.
The airplane was completely destroyed on impact, and the wreckage was consumed by an enormous fuel fire, taking the lives of all 187 passengers and crew on board. The fire burned for well over 24 hours, and in the process it also took the lives of a further 12 people inside of the building that was hit. This was, and still is, the worst air disaster in the history of South America. The final report found that there was not one single cause to this disaster. The immediate reason was that the captain had forgotten to move the right thrust lever from climb back to idle, which prevented the braking system from working, making it impossible to stop on the runway. But even though that was the direct cause, it wasn't really why this crash had happened. This error was deemed to have been made possible by a combination of stress and poor organization. The captain was facing intense stress due to numerous factors, including the dangerous airport, the wet weather, the high landing weight, the inoperative reverser, the accident on the previous day, the industry climate, the management culture, and the unusual crew composition. And all of this stress greatly increased the likelihood of a mistake happening. The risks associated with this kind of stress can be greatly reduced by just talking about it amongst the crew, but we don't know whether that actually happened here, and we never will. At the same time, the pilots were essentially on their own, without the kind of support systems that we would expect at all levels in this industry. In the end, Brazil's Accident Investigation Agency issued no less than 82 separate recommendations after this accident. One of the most important ones was that ANAC needed to find a way to add runway and safety areas at Congonhas, even if that meant shortening the runway down. It just wasn't acceptable to have a situation where almost any runway overrun was potentially fatal at the busiest airport in Brazil. Now, ANAC was slow to react to this, but changes did eventually take place, and in 2022, runway 35 left and 17 right was fitted with something known as Enhanced Materials Arrestor Systems, or EMAS, at both ends. This system consists of a bed of crushable material that collapses under the aircraft's landing gear, generating friction that brings a speeding airplane down to a stop within a very short distance. The installation of EMAS has greatly increased not only the available safety margins, but also the pilot's peace of mind when landing at cramped airports like Congonhas or even Chicago Midway. And this is especially important in a time when the number of runway excursions is actually going up, even as most other types of safety incidents are becoming less common. Now, watch these videos next and consider supporting my team and I by joining.
That's wild. Absolutely crazy. Alright. We originally started our descent. And we are on the arrival. Ardell 9 whiskey. So by the time we get to Moba, we'll kind of be on a slight left base for runway 25. Okay. From the looks of it, I don't see Charles de Gaulle, right? Oh, no, that's Orly. Okay. There's a couple planes there. Somebody just departed to go to Malpensa on their way. Okay. Let's get a weather update. Okay. So we actually beat the really bad weather. Okay. No gusting wind is cool with me. Brief this ILS really quick. Alright, so we have the ILS localizer runway 25, Paris Orly. Frequency 111.75, course 253. It's mandatory that we're at 3,000 feet when we get the glide slope at 8.3 DME of OLW. Decision height is 200. Decision altitude is 487. Airport elevation is 291. And the runway is 287. ILS glide slope is 3 degrees standard, and we have rails and pappies and high intensity runway lights. Missed approach, climb straight ahead at 700 feet, turn left, max to 185 knots, into 198, and climb to 2000 as directed. Okay. Yeah, there were clouds. Definitely need to go back to my old settings because this is crazy. Alright. These are 310. Degrees, 10, 11, 200. Message. Watching to see if I see any other traffic. But I don't think so, Alright, there's 10,000 feet at Mulba. Perfect. Alright. Let's head on over to our final fixes. I forgot to do is put in that altitude. 3,000. Oh, so it works out. Perfect. Wait. Yep. No, wait. No, I'm tripping. It's not 3,000. It is 2,000. So once we get established, I'll change that over to 2,000. Alright. What are we, essentially 25 miles out or so? It's 31, okay. Here's the rain. Slightly for a second. Seatbelt signs are on already. Double check that there's no traffic. There's somebody behind me though. The EasyJet. Keep that in mind. What's this guy here doing? He's on the ground. Alright, there's the EasyJet behind me. Yeah. We already have gone through the star, and now we're just heading to the glide slope now. 6,000 feet for 3,000. position. Alright, so we get down to 3,000 feet here. If we stop stuttering. Oh yeah. So there's no traffic that'll be a factor to me, but I am definitely in front of the EasyJet, so okay, so that's these people telling me that they're good there. I'll let them know. I don't know how to work this.
The cabin is now secure for landing.
Oh shit, okay. Okay, I got that to work. How do I get it to stop flashing? The next question. It's real ugly looking down here. I'll make my radio calls here in a second. I'm doing green dot. 3,000. Make the first radio call. 13 miles, okay. Orly traffic, Air France 7573, 13 mile final runway 25, Orly traffic. Alright. Localizer is definitely active. More like a 10 mile final, okay. Active, flaps 1 down here, flaps 2, gear down, right, approach mode, flaps 4. I'll make another call at 5 miles. Alright, so remember, minimums is 200. I think visibility was 200 to 2,000 meters, I'm sorry, so
2,000.
I think we're pretty good to go. Alright, so before landing, checklist. Cabin crew advised, landing gear is down, flaps set to landing, spoilers are armed, auto brakes not required, engine mode selector is normal, stereo lights are checked, go around altitude 2,000. There we go, set. ECAM memo landing no blue, and there's the runway. Orly traffic, Air France 7573, 5 mile final, runway 25, Orly traffic. Last call. Alright, one thing I do need to do is pull this up here. So from 25, we're gonna probably maybe Whiskey 4. Probably shoot for Whiskey 4. I hope and pray for the best. Alright. Wind is beating us up just a little bit. Autopilot. Hand fly this baby a little bit. Oh man.
500. 400.
Maybe I should have left the autopilot on. Oh.
100 above.
A little sketchy here.
Minimum.
One for landing.
100. 50. 40. 30. 20. Retard. 5.
Oh, with the floater. Oh. First thrust set. 80 knots. I had it lined up really well too. I was like, and then it just floated. You just floated on me. Nah, I had it under control, man. I still was over the touchdown markers. Orly traffic, Air France 7573, clear of runway 25, Orly traffic. Yeah, those touchdown markers are very important. If I'm past them, then, you know, that's definitely a sign of a go-around. Or if I'm not in control for sure, that's another sign of a go-around. Too high, sign of a go-around. Too low, sign of a go-around. I mean, there's just certain parameters. Alright, let's get those lights in the APU. There are a lot of reasons to do a go-around. I can't believe it floated though, cause oh man, if you could only understand how it felt, coming over the threshold. I had a little bit of rudder in, and it straightened itself out, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. In my mind, I'm like, all right, let me just flare it out, and then it just kind of floated. It's probably that window. Alright, so we're gonna go back to Tango 32. Yeah, Tango 32. What's up, Reaper man? Did you actually just jump in? Did you miss that? Very funny landing. feel like I gotta go to work today, but I don't. Just waking up is crazy. 10:30. What time do you go to bed? Alright, here. I can actually tell. GS6, they have the parking. It's Tango 32. Perfect. No follow me, just set it up. So it is right here. Alright, let's hit that last taxi light, 'cause they're literally right here. 3:30 is wild, bro. Alright. Even tighter turn. Oh. There she is. I gave it just a little bit too much braking. And now I gave it just a little bit too much thrust. It won't go right. Okay, there we go. How, bro? How? Oh, I went over by a little bit. Brake set. Masters off. Beacon off. Seatbelt signs off. Fuel pumps off.
The boarding requested.
Is the gate gonna connect on its own? Or do I gotta call for it? I'm gonna call for it, I guess. GS6 does not do well with calling the gates for me. Let's try it this way. There.
Passengers deboarding starting.
Yeah, there it is. Hit the ground services. All the doors open. All the doors are open. Good deal. Alright, so they should be getting off the flight. There's the EasyJet that just landed behind me. Oh, what a great day. Alright, that was smooth. That was smooth. I'm probably gonna hop off here and take a little break to get some life essentials together, and then I'll be back on probably playing Multiverses and/or what was the other one? Or Dragon Ball Fighters. I'll make up my mind in between. But yeah. Reaper, you still there? Reaper's probably gone. Dwayne, oh no, he's still here. What the hell is that, a banana? You end up playing some balloons today? I feel like I'm gonna touch everything today. Done a bit, alright. I'm not in any rush right now. I'm just gonna give it a. I gotta get. Okay. What is this? I've never seen. Oh, okay, that's what that is. I gotta get your little friend here together. Alright, guys. I'm gonna. Let's go raid QF music. I'm gonna raid QF music, and I'll be back on in maybe like 20 minutes to an hour or so. Thanks for joining in and check out QF music. Peace.